Conspiracy theorists love to hate Constantine. They can blame him for everything they think went wrong with Christianity. If you want the early Christians to be Muslims, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, or New Age mystics, just say they were, but claim Constantine changed the religion and wiped out any trace of them. Of course, this is all nonsense that is not supported by historical evidence, yet myths about who Constantine was and what he did are still spread on social media. So let's set the record straight. These are the top 10 myths about Constantine and why they are wrong. Number 10. Constantine was a priest of the god Mithras while emperor. If you know any bit of history, you know how crazy this sounds, but many have claimed this. The writer Mark Amaru Pinkham said, "In truth, Constantine remained a lifelong worshipper and priest of the solar god Sol Invictus Mithras, and proved his devotion to Mithras by making the national holy day of the Roman Empire Mithras' holy day, Sunday." You can also find videos making similar outlandish claims.
So the Roman officer class, which Constantine belonged to, secretly worshipped Mithras at this temple.
Now, Constantine also worshipped the sun god Mithras. And yes, we have found the actual temples and the altars that he used to do Mithraism rituals on.
In reality, this is all nonsense. There are no ancient texts that ever state Constantine was a priest of Mithras, let alone worship the deity. Before his conversion, he would have worshipped the traditional Roman gods like Sol and Apollo, who were solar deities. But even though they often shared similar titles with Mithras, there is no evidence they were ever conflated with him. Mithraic scholar Roger Beck states they were seen as different deities. They were even depicted together, indicating they were different deities. It is plausible to believe that Constantine, at some point before his conversion, paid homage to Mithras in some way, but there is no evidence he was a dedicated worshipper of the god, let alone a cult priest. The burden is on the one claiming he was a Mithraic priest to provide any evidence of this. Number 9. Constantine's conversion to Christianity wasn't sincere. The common belief today is that Constantine was a lifelong pagan and only used Christianity for political reasons. Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code claims that Constantine was a pagan until he was on his deathbed. Christopher Hitchens said, "Christianity was eventually adopted for political reasons by the Emperor Constantine and made it into an official faith." But this is not accurate. First, all of our early witnesses attest that Constantine's conversion was genuine. Even the pagan historian Zosimus was convinced that Constantine converted to Christianity. If Constantine was a lifelong pagan, Zosimus would have likely noted this to mock the Christians. Eusebius reported in his biography of Constantine that he was told directly by the emperor that in the year 312 he prayed to the Christian god and received a vision from heaven before an important battle. Eusebius says that he and his army saw a cross of light in the heavens with the inscription, "Conquer by this." Constantine went on to win the battle, vindicating the vision for him. The tutor of Constantine's sons tells a simpler story. Lactantius says Constantine was told in a dream to put the Christian Chi symbol on his army's shields before the battle. Peter Wise has offered a reconstruction of how these two accounts can harmonize, by suggesting Constantine and his army saw a rare solar event, a complex halo phenomenon. Later he had a dream of a deity and discussed it with some Christians in his entourage, who told him that Jesus appeared to him. Regardless of what Constantine saw or experienced, given the evidence, this seems to be when Constantine converted. Bart Ehrman says, "Constantine did not remain a committed pagan his entire life. He himself marked his conversion with a decisive moment that occurred, as it turns out, on the battlefield. Constantine certainly began to see himself as a Christian in some sense, starting with this climactic moment in 312. Peter J. Leithart reminds us that Roman army standards were religious objects, which soldiers venerated. Constantine wore Christian symbols on his armor throughout his reign. He could not have changed this without a powerful justification. His troops would have likely protested and possibly revolted over such an offense, fearing wrath from the gods. Constantine only would have done this if he believed he received a powerful message from Jesus. After his conversion, we see he gradually replaced pagan symbols on coins with the Christian Chi symbol. After the battle, he entered Rome and refused to offer sacrifices to the god Jupiter. The victory arch he erected 3 years later was ambiguous and failed to give credit to any pagan deity. Raymond Van Dam notes it lacks evidence of homage to the cult of Jupiter. He didn't get rid of all the ancient customary pagan symbols. Until 325 AD, he was co-ruling with the Emperor Licinius. Keeping his Christian convictions minimal during this time was probably strategic, given that most of the empire was pagan. After this, we see him using Christian symbols more prominently. He probably didn't fully understand his new faith at first, but as Bart Ehrman says, by the 320s, we see he was firmly committed to it. Even in his own writings, we see Constantine was committed to Christianity. He wrote to someone named Macarius about the Savior's grace and giving the monument of his holy passion. He gave a 2-hour Good Friday sermon where he condemned pagan worship, taught Christ as God, and said Jesus went to the cross to atone for sins. Eusebius wrote that he said, "Delay not then, dear friends, delay not, you ministers of God, and faithful servants of him, who is our common Lord and Savior, began from this moment to discard the causes of that disunion which has come among you, and remove the perplexities of controversy by embracing the principles of peace." It seems from his actions and words that his conversion to Christianity was genuine. Some argue his conversion wasn't real, because he was not baptized until his deathbed, but this was a common practice in the 4th century. Although the majority position among church fathers was infant baptism, there were some that advocated for delaying baptism. Tertullian advocated for delaying baptism past childhood, and by the 4th century, many were delaying baptism until as late as possible for fear that a mortal sin would cancel it out. Because of later church fathers like Augustine, infant baptism became the standard practice, but this was not yet established in Constantine's day. So his delay actually suggests his commitment to Christianity, not his rejection. Number 8. Constantine made Christianity the official state religion. This myth is repeated often online.
Ever since Constantine made a particular creed the official religion of the Roman Empire, Christian, in the Western world has been synonymous with empire.
Christianity was essentially an illegal movement. After Constantine, within a few years, a few decades, it would become the official religion of the Roman Empire.
Richard Dawkins stated in Outgrowing God that it's a historical accident, the adoption of Christianity as the Roman Empire's official religion by the Emperor Constantine in AD 312, that led to the Lord being worshipped around the world today. This is of course not true. Constantine did convert to Christianity, helped to end Christian persecution, and promoted the religion with funds and political moves, but he never made it the official religion of the empire. Paganism existed in the empire, even among the elites, for many generations after Constantine's death. He instituted a policy of religious tolerance for the empire. Peter J. Leithart says, Constantine continued to have pagan philosophers in his court for years after his conversion. Pagans continued to serve in his administration and army. He gave pagans high positions. A pagan helped him gather materials from around the east to adorn his great Christian city of Constantinople. Some point to the Edict of Milan as when Christianity became a legal religion, but this is not actually true. The edict only confirmed the status quo. Constantine and Maxentius had already ended Christian persecutions in the West, and Galerius, on his deathbed, ended Christian persecutions in the East in 311 and asked for prayer. Under Constantine, Christianity thrived and grew, but it was never pronounced as the official religion of the empire, and Constantine never forced the pagan masses to convert. His general policy was one of religious tolerance, while actively favoring Christianity. Number 7. Constantine used Christianity to control the masses. This is an odd claim to anyone who knows their history, but nevertheless you'll find it frequently online.
If the Roman Empire is going to use Christianity as the state religion to manipulate people, We as the politician class need to be able to know what Christianity is. How can we manipulate people through religion if we don't understand the religion?
Constantine was brilliant. He's like, how do we control everything? And they were like, well, if we rewrite history, we can write the future too, because who controls the past controls the future. And then they also realized we can't really have people like reaching higher states of consciousness through spirituality and through these teachings, so let's also take over religion. They then turned into a monotheistic religion.
This does not make sense when you consider how small of a religion Christianity was at this point. Peter J. Leithart estimates that Christians were only about 10 to 15% of the population at the beginning of the 4th century. Bart Ehrman says Christians made up only about 5 to 8%. Clifford Bachman says Christians made up no more than 5% of the Roman population at this time. Given that the highest estimates don't put Christians at over 15%, it makes absolutely no sense for Constantine to have thought he could have used such an unpopular religion to control the masses. This would be like the President of the United States converting to Islam. Such a conversion would be more of a liability than a benefit, and there's hardly any way he could use it to control the American population. The same was true for Constantine. The upper class was predominantly pagan, and most of the army was pagan. How exactly was Constantine supposed to use a religion to control people that most despised and rejected? If Constantine wanted a religion to control his subjects, the imperial cult was already in existence and would have been a better tool for the task. Constantine did not force the army to convert to Christianity, and even employed many pagans in his court. There is no evidence he adopted Christianity to control the masses. Number 6. Constantine forces theology on the churches at Nicaea. In 325 AD, Constantine called for a council of bishops to meet at Nicaea to discuss the Arian controversy. The claim you'll find online is that Constantine used his power at this council to ensure the church would teach what he wanted. Even some historians have made this claim. James Carroll said, Constantine asserted the right to exercise absolute authority over the entire church. Jacob Burckhardt said that at the Council of Nicaea, Constantine insisted upon the questionable expression homoousios against the will of the majority, whereupon the majority patiently submitted. But the early texts tell a different story. Constantine had already presided over a church issue. The sect known as the Donatists appealed to him to settle their dispute with the church. Constantine called a council to settle the disagreements in 314 in the city of Arles. Above all, Constantine's main concern was unity in the church. There is no evidence he had a theological agenda that he forced upon the bishops. As far as the evidence reveals, Constantine let the bishops work out the issues while he stood back. Then he merely enforced that decision. He did not make it for them. In fact, in his own words he said, "For I declare, as is true, that the judgment of bishops ought to be looked upon as if the Lord himself was sitting in judgment. For it is not lawful for them to think or to judge in any other way, excepting as they have been taught by the teaching of Christ." This same mentality was present at Nicaea. Constantine let the bishops sort out the issues. Leithart says, he was not capable of simply imposing his will on the bishops, even if he had wanted to. And there are clear signs that he did not want to. Bishops had wills too. It was a gesture, but Constantine knew it would be a meaningful one. Constantine refused to take a place in the council until invited. He did not dominate the council or formulate the Nicene Creed. He did not even sign off on it, since he wasn't a bishop or even baptized at this point. This was the work of bishops, and Constantine merely enforced their decision. All he wanted was unity and for all Christians to work together, but he didn't even obtain that, since the dispute between the Arians and the Orthodox Christians raged on after the council, and Constantine couldn't control either side. For example, Arius later professed he would accept Nicene Orthodoxy and ordered the bishop Athanasius to accept him, to which Athanasius refused. In 334, Constantine called another council to deal with the Arian dispute, this time at Caesarea. Athanasius refused to attend, and Constantine backed down. He never had some iron grip on the church as some have proposed. Let's remember that many of the bishops who were at Nicaea had lived through the Diocletian persecution. Many of them faced persecution and possibly torture for their faith, and would not compromise. it is unlikely they would have been easily manipulated at Nicaea into changing their theology to whatever Constantine wanted. The Christians were beholden to the authority of sacred scriptures. Christianity could not be turned into an instrument of the empire. J.H.W.J. Liebeschitz said, "The church could never be simply the religious department of the res publica, as the old religion had been. The church had its own officers, the clergy, who were absolutely distinct from the officers of the state. It accepted the authority of sacred writings and of traditions which were not part of the Greco-Roman civilization." Number 5. Constantine created the doctrine of the Trinity. A common myth about the Council of Nicaea is that this is where the doctrine of the Trinity came from. Constantine allegedly created it by blending Christianity with paganism.
It was Constantine that reconciled Paul's Jesus from the historical Jesus and decided that he would go with Paul's Jesus and kill everybody else. And that's where the Trinity was born.
The point of discussion was between these Christian bishops. The majority did not believe Jesus to be God, like God the Father, on par with him, equal to him. The majority of the bishops, over 200 of them, didn't believe in that. Constantine forced the bishops to believe in the current text of the Council of Nicaea, or the Creed of Nicaea rather,
But the council did not discuss the doctrine of the Trinity directly. The main purpose was to deal with the Arian heresy. The preacher Arius was teaching that Jesus was a created being in a separate substance from the Father. The council affirmed the Father and Jesus were of the same substance, and therefore both eternally God. This was also not the minority position thrust upon the majority. Bart Ehrman says, "The vast majority of the 200 or 250 bishops present sided with the view of Athanasius against Arius." Leo D. Davis said, "When the creed was finished, perhaps by June 19th, 18 bishops still opposed it. Constantine then intervened to threaten with exile anyone who would not sign it. In the end, only Arius and his diehard supporters, the Libyan Secundus and Theonas, refused to sign anything. Secundus and Theonas were deposed as bishops, and with Arius, sent into exile." The belief in the Trinity also existed in the church before Nicaea. 2nd century church father Tertullian coined the term. The bishops of Nicaea borrowed language already used by previous church fathers, such as Justin Martyr and Tertullian, to formulate the Nicene Creed. Michael F. Bird says, "Accordingly, irrespective of the different ways in which Jesus was accorded divinity, the proto-Orthodox and pro-Nicene conception of Jesus as true God was not the product of a late Platonic Big Bang. Rather, ontological commitments in Christology were early, explicit, and explicable within 1st century religious environs and proved to be enduring." The Council of Nicaea only offered more formal language on what the church had already taught about the nature of God. Neither Constantine nor the bishops of Nicaea invented the doctrine of the Trinity. Number 4. Constantine created the New Testament. One of the most persistent myths about Nicaea is that this is when the books of the New Testament canon were decided upon.
In 325 AD, Emperor Constantine actually went through and took out a bunch of information from the Bible and edited it.
An instance of intentional alteration of the Bible was during the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. This gathering of church leaders was called by Emperor Constantine to address the growing divisions within Christianity. At this council, decisions were made regarding which books would be included in the Bible and which would be excluded.
They get together at Nicaea. They come up with a solution for the Trinity. There were 30 Gospels. They threw 26 away. They ordered them destroyed.
But as noted, the council was called to mainly deal with the Arian heresy. The biblical canon was not even discussed. Bart Ehrman doesn't mince words when he says, "The historical reality is that the Emperor Constantine had nothing to do with the formation of the canon of Scripture. He did not choose which books to include or exclude, and he did not order the destruction of the Gospels that were left out of the canon. There were no imperial book burnings." There isn't a scrap of evidence that Constantine formulated the biblical canon or decided which books would be included. Most of the books that are in the New Testament were already accepted by the church long before this. A few of the books were still disputed, and some thought books later deemed as apocrypha should have been included. The church finally settled on the canon, formulated by Athanasius, which Constantine had no part in. The most involvement Constantine ever had with the biblical canon was that in 331, he requested from Eusebius 50 codices of the Christian Bible for churches in his new city of Constantinople. But he did not order which books were to be included. That was for the church to decide. Number 3. Constantine transformed a pagan holiday into Christmas. Every year around Christmas, we are constantly bombarded with the claim that Christmas is really a pagan holiday. Constantine moved the celebration of the birthday of Jesus to December 25th to coincide with a pagan holiday, like Saturnalia or the winter solstice.
Why is it that all the pagan sun gods were said to be born on December 25th? Why did Constantine declare this date as the day Jesus was born?
Why do we celebrate it on December 25th? We celebrate it because of Constantine.
The problem is there is no record of a pagan holiday on the 25th during the time of Constantine or prior. Saturnalia began on December 17th and never lasted until the 25th. December 25th was the winter solstice on the Julian calendar, but we have no record of any pagan holiday on this date before 354. The calendar of Philocalus was the first to mention that December 25th was the celebration of Sol Invictus. During the time of Constantine, an inscription that dates to around 318 says that Licinius worshipped and venerated the sun on November 18th. In the 3rd century, Emperor Aurelian worshipped the sun with chariot races every 4 years in October. We are strangely lacking any evidence of a pagan holiday on December 25th that Constantine could have taken over. And references to pagan holidays on the 25th that date to after Constantine could be reactionary to the rise of Christianity. In other words, it is plausible that pagans placed Sol Invictus on the 25th to compete with Christmas instead of the other way around. Scholars today note Christians likely placed Christmas on the 25th because of their own calculations. They believed Jesus was supposed to die on the same day that he was conceived, and they believed Jesus died on March 25th. One only has to count forward 9 months, and you arrive on December 25th. We have good reason to believe Christians had made this calculation as early as the 3rd century and before Constantine. Even if there was some obscure pagan holiday on this date, the Christians picked December 25th for their own reasons. We have no evidence Constantine tried to Christianize a pagan holiday. Number 2. Constantine changed the Christian day of worship to Sunday. It is true that Constantine declared Sunday to be a solemn day of rest throughout the empire, but this wasn't enforced as a religious rite that all had to observe. Torah-observant Christians, or the Hebrew Roots movement, often claimed Christians would rest and worship on Saturday, until Constantine moved this to Sunday to blend paganism with Christianity.
In the year 321 AD, Constantine the Great, the emperor of the Roman Empire and a Roman Catholic convert seeking to heal the division within his empire between paganism and Christianity, he made a decree that all the inhabitants of Rome were to rest on the venerable day of the sun, which is the first day of the week, Sunday. And this is the origin of the human authority behind the institution of Sunday as a holy day.
It's not because Jesus rose from the dead on Sunday. It's because the Romans chose to officially change the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday in 321 AD under Emperor Constantine, because that's the day the pagans had their Sabbath, and it was easier to get the pagans to convert to Christianity if they were allowed to keep their pagan traditions.
The problem with this line of reasoning is there's no evidence Sunday was seen as a pagan Sabbath. Pagans didn't have a Sabbath rest because paganism was drastically different from Judaism. Christians chose Sunday to be a holy day because the Gospels report Jesus rose on the first day of the week. And we have evidence from the 1st and 2nd centuries that Christians were keeping Sunday as a holy day. Justin Martyr said, "But Sunday is the day on which we all hold our common assembly, because it is the first day on which God, having wrought a change in the darkness and matter, made the world, and Jesus Christ our Savior, on the same day rose from the dead." Ignatius said, "Those who were brought up in the ancient order of things, i.e. Jews, have come to the possession of a new hope, no longer observing the Sabbath, but living in the observance of the Lord's Day, on which also our life has sprung up again, by him and by his death. The Lord's Day was a common title for Sunday. The Epistle of Barnabas said, "We keep the 8th day with joyfulness, the day also on which Jesus rose again from the dead." The Didache said, "But every Lord's Day, gather yourself together and break bread." Even the book of Revelation has a reference to the Lord's Day. Sunday was sacred to Christians from a very early point, and we see in the early centuries of Christianity that Christians had already stopped keeping the Sabbath long before Constantine. Despite what Torah observers claim, Peter J. Leithart says, Christian theology was re-Judaized in the century following Constantine. He obviously wasn't a Torah observer, but he rebuilt Jerusalem by using themes from the Hebrew Bible and placing a focus on the Jewish scriptures. The 12 columns in the hemisphere of the apse symbolized the 12 disciples and the 12 tribes of Israel, and perhaps the columns and pillars of the Holy Sepulchre were echoes of the sacred forest of religious mythology, just as the inner atrium was in fact understood as a sacred garden or paradise. So Christianity during the time of Constantine moved a little bit in a Jewish direction, not away from it. The use of Sunday as a holy day of rest was already a long-standing Christian tradition. Before we get to number 1, remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you're updated when new videos are coming out. We have several videos on various topics coming out soon, so hit the bell and stay updated to know when these videos will be published. And finally, number 1, Constantine was a tyrannical villain of history. No matter where you turn on the internet, Constantine is painted as a villain, a tyrant who enforced radical changes on the Roman world. But the real story is far more interesting. Constantine was by no means perfect. He had his own share of sins, but he was also not pure evil. In fact, Constantine instituted policies that helped the underprivileged and poor. He restructured the legal system to help those that needed it. Before this, fees and bribes were required to advance one's case through the legal system. The rich could always appeal a verdict and could pay the fee easily, as well as offer bribes. If the poor could not afford the fee for the appeal, then the rich would win the case. Constantine dealt with this system so that the poor could have a better chance of having a fair trial. He made use of Christian ecclesiastical courts to hear cases. The bishops charged nothing, and they rendered verdicts after a single hearing. Leithart says, Constantine not only changed the rules for appeals to remove some of the advantages of the rich, but also provided resources to bishops and encouraged them to dispense charity, and urged his own officials to do the same. He passed laws permitting women over 18 to control inherited property, instead of it passing to the next of male kin. He allowed women the right to initiate divorce in certain circumstances, thus giving women more rights than they had had in the empire. As impossible as it was to enforce, Constantine forbid married men from having concubines and issued harsh punishments for rape. Crucifixion was outlawed, and he worked to end gladiator shows because of their brutality. He even passed laws against animal cruelty and undermined the legal foundation of the Roman practice of child exposure. He didn't abolish slavery, but he passed laws to benefit slaves, such as laws that helped keep slave families together and made it easier for the offspring of slaves to be free. He ruled that a master who beat a slave to death would be prosecuted as a murderer. In fact, Constantine's endorsement of manumission went further than that of most Christian writers of the time. Though not requiring manumission, Constantine did encourage it, and for that, there was no model in the early church. He obviously was not perfect. He ordered the persecution and torture of the Donatist sect before rescinding it. His legal reforms did not go as far as we moderns would prefer. But he was a man ahead of his time. Critics often paint him as a villain and miss much of the reform he pushed. By all standards, he was one of the best Roman emperors, who actively worked to help the underprivileged and marginalized. History should remember him as he truly was, the first Christian emperor who actively pushed Christian values to reform the Roman world. The historical Constantine is far more interesting and inspiring than the mythical Constantine constructed by modern conspiracy theorists. These myths about Constantine need to cease because they hide the truth and prevent us from learning about the real man, who was a fairly good Christian for his time and tried to make the world a better place, as imperfect as he was.